The rain hadn't touched Manhattan that morning, but the air still carried that strange, aching stillness, like something important had ended and/or begun. Inside the glass and steel tower of Whitmore Holdings, silence stretched thick across the 58th floor, the kind of silence only power could command. And at the heart of it sat Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire tech mogul whose name made headlines more often than presidents did. His eyes, a steel gray that seemed carved from glaciers, were fixed on a single folder atop his desk. He hadn't touched it in 10 minutes. He didn't need to reread it. He had already memorized every line. Because this wasn't just another deal. This was the answer to something that kept him up at 3 a.m., staring at his ceiling in silence. Legacy. It had started after the funeral. The final handshake turned cold when the last mourner left the Whitmore estate. His father, Richard Whitmore, was gone. A titan, a legend, a man who'd built the empire Ethan now ruled. And with his passing came the question Ethan had dodged for years. What are you leaving behind? The answer echoed hollowly in his chest. No wife, no children, no family. Only numbers, only control. He had tried once, long ago, to love, to build something real. But it ended in betrayal. His fiancée in the arms of the man he trusted with his board seat. Since then, Ethan has shut down every door, which has led to vulnerability, and replaced them with contracts, power, and logic. He didn't need emotions to build empires. He just needed discipline. But that nagging emptiness, it crept in lately, in between business meetings and silent nights. He didn't want a marriage. He didn't want the chaos of love. What he wanted was an heir. So, in the cold light of reason, Ethan had crafted a plan. Precise, clinical. He would hire a surrogate, one woman, carefully selected, to carry his child. She would receive medical care, complete privacy, and a life-changing sum in return. No complications, no emotions, just biology and business. His legal team had vetted dozens of candidates, Ivy League students, discreet models, medical interns, but none had passed the final test, his instinct, until he saw her. Naomi Carter. Her photo hadn't been filtered, airbrushed, or posed. She sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her mother asleep behind her. Tired eyes, but strong. Graceful, but unpolished. Her skin was warm cinnamon, and her hair had a halo of soft curls. She wasn't a woman used to being saved. She was the one who saved others. Something in Ethan's chest shifted. He told himself it was just her backstory. 24 years old. Pre-med dropout to care for a sick parent. Working 2 jobs. Nurse assistant by day, barista by night. No scandals, no social media drama. Desperation without despair. She wasn't broken and just cornered by circumstance. And Ethan respected that kind of strength. He closed the folder, picked up the phone, set up a meeting. Tomorrow, noon, in my office. When the elevator doors slid open the next day, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Off balance. Naomi stepped into the marble lobby in a simple navy blue dress. She didn't wear jewelry and didn't smile. Her eyes scanned the room, calculating but cautious. She walked like someone who knew how to leave quietly if she had to. Ethan watched her approach through the glass walls. For a moment, he felt like the glass stood between them and everything that kept him safe. He stood when she entered. "Miss Carter," he said, offering his hand. Naomi paused, then shook it firmly. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was steady, low, no nervous laugh, no stammer. She was scared. He could see how her fingers clenched slightly, but she was controlled. That impressed him more than he'd admit. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "I won't waste your time," Ethan began. "I'm prepared to offer you a private contract for 1 year. You will carry my child. You will be compensated with $5 million. Silence. Naomi didn't gasp, didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened where they gripped the chair. "You want to hire me?" she said, slowly. "To have your baby." "Yes." "Why me?" Ethan leaned forward, voice low. "Because I trust strength. And you have it." Her brows knit. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. For a long moment, their eyes locked. Hers, warm brown, laced with disbelief. His, cool, unwavering. A standoff of worlds neither understood. "I need time to think," she said at last. "Take it," Ethan replied. "But know this. If you agree, there's no turning back." Naomi stood, nodding once, and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, Ethan felt that unsettling tug in his chest again. It wasn't fair. It was something far more dangerous. Hope. Thank you for letting this story find you today, if you've made it this far. Whether you've stumbled upon it or followed every word with your heart, I hope it sparked something deep within. I'd love to know where you're watching from, or what you think of Ethan and Naomi. Drop a comment below. And if stories like this speak to you, feel free to like this video and follow the channel for more emotional journeys like this one. We're just getting started. Part 2 will change everything. Naomi Carter had never been inside a place so quiet and expensive that it felt like time walked on tiptoe. The elevator had closed behind her, and she'd ridden down the steel and glass shaft of Whitmore Holdings, with her hands tight against her coat, pulse still echoing in her ears. The city blurred outside the windows, taxi horns, sirens, chatter. But inside, she could only hear the echo of Ethan Whitmore's voice. $5 million. 1 year. No emotions. No turning back. She hadn't even made it home before the question started. Not from others. No one knew. But from herself. What kind of woman even considers something like this? A woman is drowning. Her apartment in Harlem was barely 300 square feet. A rusted radiator hissed beside the only window, and Naomi moved on instinct, dropping her bag and kneeling by the side of the bed where her mother lay half asleep, skin pale and lips dry. "I'm back," Naomi whispered, brushing a warm cloth across her mother's forehead. It was always like this. She came home late, whispered hellos, reheated broth, kissed her mother's knuckles until dawn. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Ethan Whitmore's offer sat inside her coat pocket, printed on thick white paper, cold and heavy like a stone. She didn't sleep. Instead, Naomi watched the ceiling and played out possibilities in her mind like threads unraveling in the dark. Her mother's latest treatments had failed. A new option existed, a clinical trial, experimental and promising, but it was thousands per week. Insurance refused to cover it. The hospital's payment reminders were stacked on the kitchen counter, unopened. Naomi had spent years holding the line. She gave up Columbia, then gave up weekends. She waits at 5 a.m. and changes the bedpans at midnight. She hadn't bought new clothes in 3 years. And even now, even after everything, it still wasn't enough. So when Ethan Whitmore looked at her and said, "Because you have the strength I want my child to inherit," she felt something shift in her sense of pride and her mind of possibility. He didn't want her heart. He wanted her body, her womb, her bloodline. In exchange, she could buy her mother's time. What was the price of breathing space? Of saving someone you loved? She wasn't sure. But by morning, Naomi knew she'd stop hating herself long enough to find out. 3 days later, she stood again in front of Whitmore Tower. Not with certainty, but with resolve. The same impossibly polished assistant escorted her to the private floor. When the elevator opened, Ethan stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear, and the skyline glowing behind him like a steel cathedral. He turned the moment he saw her. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just nodded once and gestured toward the seat across from his desk. Naomi sat slowly, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Her hair was pulled back today, jawline bare, no makeup. There was a defiance in her plainness. She didn't want him to think she came here to impress him. "I've read the contract," she said. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "And?" Naomi exhaled, long and quietly. "I'll do it." A silence fell between them, the kind that stretched long enough to feel like something was breaking open inside the room. Then Ethan nodded, reached into the drawer, and pulled out a pen. "You'll be moved in by the end of the week," he said. "We'll start with a health evaluation. I've already arranged for your mother's care. Top facility, full support. Your only responsibility is rest and safety." Naomi stiffened. "You've made arrangements for her already?" He didn't look up. "I don't offer things I'm not prepared to deliver." There it was again, that cold logic, that sense that everything, even kindness, came with structure and strategy. Naomi took the pen. Her hand hovered above the page. She knew that once her name hit the paper, she couldn't undo it. But she thought of hospital hallways that smelled like bleach and silence, of her mother's wheezing at night. She couldn't answer the overdue notices, and of a man who looked at her and saw not weakness, but strength. She signed. When she slid the contract back, Ethan didn't say anything. He took it, folded it neatly into a black leather folder, and closed it with a click. "You'll have your room in the penthouse," he said. "Your privacy is important." Naomi stood, legs steadier than she expected. "And yours?" Ethan looked at her then, eyes piercing. "I don't expect privacy," he said. "I expect control." Naomi nodded once. "Then I suppose we understand each other." And in that moment, two strangers in a room built on unspoken rules and brittle trust, there was the first flicker of something else. Not affection, not an attraction, but recognition. As if both had seen something in the other that the rest of the world had missed. Naomi left the building with the wind at her back and a contract in her bag. And for the first time in months, she walked without looking down. The car that arrived outside Naomi's building was matte black and silent, like something out of a movie she never had time to finish watching. The driver didn't speak much, but he was polite. I called her Ms. Carter with a quiet nod and took her small suitcase as if it weighed nothing. She hadn't packed much, just a few sets of clothes, a notebook, her mother's rosary. The rest felt irrelevant now, suspended between what she'd left behind and what she was stepping into. As the city blurred past the windows, Naomi sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers clasped so tightly they turned pale. She wasn't scared, or at least that's what she told herself. She was determined, practical, everything this arrangement required her to be. But when the elevator doors opened to Ethan's penthouse, that steel armor of practicality began to crack. The space was impossibly quiet and vast. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls wrapped around the room like a panoramic secret. The skyline stretched broad and glittering, but the silence unsettled her most. It felt like even the city was holding its breath up here. The floors gleamed beneath her boots, cool marble flowing into deep oak. The air carried faint notes of leather and something crisp, expensive, impossible to name. She stepped inside. "You're here." The voice came from near the window, smooth as bourbon and just as dangerous. Naomi turned. Ethan stood with one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of something amber. His white shirt was undone at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms dusted with light hair, and a watch that probably cost more than her annual income before this contract. "You came alone," he added. "I don't have much worth bringing," Naomi said. Ethan's eyes flicked to her suitcase. Small, worn, taped at the zipper. "You brought yourself," he said. "That's what matters." She didn't respond. Just waited. A beat of silence passed before he gestured toward the hallway. "Your room's down the corridor. It's yours. Locked, private, with anything you might need. If something is missing, let Elise know." "Elise? My house manager. She'll check in on you, but won't interfere unless asked. I've told the staff to respect your space." "And yours?" she asked, almost without thinking. Ethan's jaw ticked. "You'll learn quickly," he said, voice like glass. "I don't take kindly to uninvited disruption." Naomi nodded slowly. "I don't make a habit of disrupting anyone, especially not the man paying me $5 million. He studied her then, not with disdain, not even challenge, but something more elusive. Curiosity. It wasn't just the contract anymore. Not really. He was trying to figure her out. She could feel it, like he was standing on the edge of her story, deciding whether to read further or close the book altogether. She broke the gaze first. "Can I see the room?" He motioned toward the hallway, and she followed. The suite wasn't opulent like she expected. No gold or velvet. Soft grays, plush textures, and light spilled in from the skyline like silk. A bed that looked untouched. A balcony with wind chimes that barely moved. A warmth in the air that didn't come from temperature but design. Ethan stood behind her in the doorway. "I chose the space myself," he said. "I wanted it to feel separate, so you could breathe." She turned slowly. "That's surprisingly thoughtful." "I can be, when I remember how," he said. The honesty in that sentence caught her off guard, and for the first time since signing the contract, Naomi's defenses didn't just rise. They wavered. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping inside. Ethan's voice dropped lower. "Naomi." She turned to look at him. Something shifted in his gaze. Less steel, more gravity. "This arrangement may be built on paper," he said, "but I won't treat you like property. You have the right to say no, at any point, to anything." Her throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because no woman's body should be a battlefield," he said, "even one she walks into willingly." Naomi didn't answer. Couldn't. Because something inside her, some long-forgotten piece, was suddenly seen, not just acknowledged, but understood. And it terrified her. Ethan nodded once, then left, the door clicking gently shut behind him. Naomi stood in the middle of her new room, alone. She stared at her reflection in the tall mirror across the wall. Same face, same eyes, but something about her felt altered. Not because of the marble floors or silent corridors, not because of the man with power in his hands and shadows in his voice, but because, for the first time in years, she wasn't running. Not toward debt, not away from fear. She was still, still enough to hear her heart beating, and it sounded steady. Naomi had lived in noise for most of her life. Sirens outside her window, the beeping of heart monitors, her mother's breath caught in sleep, dishes clinking in cramped restaurant kitchens. The kind of noise that became a rhythm, predictable, exhausting, oddly comforting. But here, in Ethan Whitmore's penthouse, the silence was something else entirely. It didn't rest. It watched. She woke the second morning to sunlight spilling across the polished wood floors, the scent of fresh linen and bergamot lingering in the air. Everything was pristine, curated, like a life carefully designed to keep the world out. Naomi sat up slowly, her eyes adjusting to the unfamiliar softness of the sheets beneath her. Her body felt weightless in the quiet, but her mind wasn't still. It never was. She reached for her notebook, the one she always kept near, and began scribbling, not words, but shapes. It was a habit she'd formed back in college during anatomy lectures. When the truth felt too big to name, she drew it instead. An hour later, a soft knock at the door broke the stillness. It was Elise, the house manager. Middle-aged, efficient, but warm-eyed. She offered a breakfast tray and a calm smile that didn't demand anything in return. Naomi thanked her, but ate in silence, unsure whether this gesture was hospitality or a reminder that she was no longer in her orbit. After breakfast, she wandered the penthouse, not aimlessly, but curiously. It was like stepping into the home of someone who'd erased all evidence of emotion. Dark wood, iron, clean lines, art without color. Shelves filled with first-edition books that looked untouched. Every surface gleamed, but none felt lived in. Naomi's fingers trailed along the back of a leather couch, and she imagined him sitting there, Ethan, alone at night, with nothing but his thoughts and whatever ghosts rich men collected. She found the library by accident. It wasn't big, but it was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, warm light, a single velvet chair tucked in the corner. She slipped inside like someone trespassing in a memory. She was halfway through thumbing the spine of a worn copy of East of Eden when she heard the door creak behind her. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. "I wondered where you disappeared to." His voice was low, amused, like he hadn't expected to find her in that room, but wasn't surprised that he had. "I didn't think you noticed I was gone," she said, facing the books. "I notice more than you think," Ethan replied, "especially when the silence feels different." Naomi turned then, slowly. He stood in the doorway, casual but unmistakably powerful. Crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, dark trousers that spoke more of quiet luxury than intention. But it was his eyes that drew her most. Gray today, not steel. Watching her, not analyzing her. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. "You live here now. You're not an intruder." She tilted her head. "It doesn't feel like I live here. It feels like I've been placed." Ethan stepped inside, slow and deliberate. "This isn't your idea of home?" Naomi laughed, just a little. "I don't think I've ever had a clear idea of that." Silence. Then Ethan's voice, quieter. "Neither have I." The admission hung in the air like something delicate, almost vulnerable. Naomi set the book down gently. "You built this place to keep people out. I built it to keep myself safe. And has it worked?" Ethan's jaw tensed. Until now. There was no flirtation in his tone, just honesty. And Naomi, who had always prided herself on reading people well, felt suddenly uncertain of how to read this man. He wasn't cold, not exactly, but he was contained like someone who had locked himself inside and thrown away the key. "You don't talk much," she said after a moment. "I've learned that words don't always help, especially when they're used to lie." Naomi nodded. "I've heard enough lies to know that, too." Another silence. But this one was softer. It didn't bruise. Ethan moved toward the window, his back to her now, his voice faint. "You remind me of someone I knew once," he said. "Someone who tried to love me before I understood what that meant." Naomi's heart gave an uncomfortable pull. She didn't ask who, didn't push. She understood what it meant to carry the echo of someone else's disappointment. Instead, she asked, "Do you regret this arrangement?" Ethan turned slowly to face her. "No," he said. "I regret needing it." That answer, blunt, stripped of polish, cut deeper than she expected. And yet, in a strange way, it soothed something in her. For the first time since she stepped into his world, Naomi realized she wasn't the only one pretending she wasn't scared. They were both carrying contracts written in ink, but also in grief, fear, and 100 invisible wounds no one else could see. As she left the library, passing Ethan in the doorway, their shoulders brushed. A spark, barely, but it was enough to unsettle them both. Later, in the quiet of her room, Naomi sat at the edge of the bed with the skyline glowing behind her. Her fingers hovered above her notebook again, but she didn't draw this time. She just stared at the blank page, heart heavy with something unnamed, because the man who claimed to want only biology and bloodlines had just let her see something far more intimate than skin. His silence, and the ache behind it. The third week passed, not with fire, but with fog. Time slipped quietly between shared silences and near-missed glances, and though Naomi and Ethan rarely spoke of anything that bled, something soft had begun to stir between them, something unspoken. Naomi often found herself walking into rooms he had just left, catching the echo of his cologne on the air or the warmth of his untouched coffee. And Ethan, who once moved through his home like a shadow, silent and surgical, had begun to linger. He lingered when she passed him in the hallway, his gaze following the trail of her curls. He remained at the edge of the kitchen when she brewed her tea instead of calling Elise. He lingered in the sound of his voice, which had softened, not in volume, but in shape. That night, the city was dusted in mist, the skyline blurred and glowing like something imagined. Naomi stood barefoot on the terrace in a knit sweater and leggings, a steaming mug cradled between her palms. The quiet felt different now, less like a void, more like waiting. She didn't hear him approach. "You like the cold," Ethan said softly, standing a few feet behind her. Naomi didn't turn. "I like the air when it doesn't try to prove anything." He was quiet for a beat. "And the sky?" She tilted her head. "I like that it doesn't care what I think of it." There was a breath of a smile in his voice. "You say things no one else would say. I think things no one else listens to." Ethan stepped closer, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the marble. She felt him before she saw him, the shift in air, the weight of attention. "Why do you keep coming out here?" he asked, genuinely this time. Naomi glanced at him, her breath visible in the cold. "Because sometimes I need to remember that I'm not trapped. Even here." His brow lifted slightly, not in offense but curiosity. "Do you feel trapped?" "Don't you?" she asked back. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped beside her, facing the endless stretch of glittering buildings and the soft hush of wind. "I used to," Ethan said finally. "Before you came." Naomi turned her head slowly. His eyes were fixed ahead, jaw tight. She studied his profile, the elegant bone structure, the tension carved deep into the line between his brow, the way he looked like a man trying very hard not to feel something, and failing. "You don't have to protect me from you," she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her, and his face was shadowed in the low light. "Maybe I'm not protecting you. Maybe I'm protecting myself." Naomi blinked, not because she didn't expect the answer, but because she understood it far too well. She set her mug down on the ledge and folded her arms, rubbing the heat from her skin. "You built this arrangement to feel nothing. And yet here you are, out here in the cold, Trying to understand a woman you paid not to matter. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. Ethan flinched, but only a little. You matter, he said, voice low. To your child, she replied. Not to you. His jaw tensed. That's not true. Naomi looked at him fully now. Then tell me what it is. A long silence stretched between them, tense and shivering. Then Ethan reached up, slowly, and brushed a curl from her cheek. His fingers were warm despite the wind. They lingered. Naomi's breath hitched. This isn't part of the contract, she whispered. I know, he said. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. His hand slid to her jaw, his thumb ghosting over her skin. He stared at her as if trying to memorize every part of her face without being caught. It was as if touching her wasn't the risk, but feeling her was. Why me? She asked, the question more fragile than intended. He didn't answer right away. Then, so softly, it nearly broke her, he said, because when you walked into my office, everything I built to forget what I once wanted cracked. Naomi's heartbeat was loud enough to drown out the wind, and still, she stayed. Ethan leaned in, the distance between them narrowing into breath, silence, and something almost holy. But before his lips could reach hers, he stopped. He closed his eyes and pulled back, jaw clenched, voice raw. I can't, he said. Not like this. Naomi stepped back too, though her body hummed with tension. You're the one who drew the lines, she said. His eyes opened, darker now, wounded. And you're the one who makes me want to cross them. They stood in silence, hearts pounding in two separate cages. Then Ethan stepped away first, his back to her, his hands buried deep in his pockets. Good night, Naomi, he said quietly, returning to the apartment. Naomi didn't move for a long time. She stood barefoot and breathless, staring into the skyline that no longer looked distant. And for the first time since she signed that contract, she wasn't sure who she was more afraid of, the man who promised her nothing, or the man who, without saying a word, had just offered her everything he didn't know how to give. The next morning came in shades of gray. A storm had rolled in overnight, brushing the penthouse's windows with cold rain and soft thunder. Naomi stood in the kitchen barefoot, her palms wrapped around a steaming cup of mint tea. She hadn't slept. Or maybe she had, but not deeply enough to call it rest. Not after what almost happened on the terrace. There had been no kiss, no surrender. But there had been something more dangerous. Hesitation. Longing. A crack in the armor that neither of them had meant to show. Now the silence between them wasn't cold. It was warm. And Naomi wasn't sure which one was more dangerous. She took her tea into the library, where the light came softly through the rain-blurred windows. The armchair in the corner had become her quiet place. No footsteps, no questions, just her and the space to be still. She didn't expect Ethan to find her there, but he did. Sometime near noon, the door creaked open, and he appeared in the doorway, dressed in slate gray, his hair still damp from a shower, sleeves rolled casually above his forearms. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. She looked back. It was the kind of stare that didn't need translation, the kind that said, I haven't forgotten, and neither have you. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said, voice low. You didn't. Ethan stepped into the room, slowly, like a man unsure whether he was welcome. Naomi didn't offer him a seat, but he took the one across from her anyway. A beat passed, then another. I didn't sleep, he said. She raised an eyebrow. You don't strike me as someone who admits things like that. I don't. Then why now? Ethan's eyes met hers. Because you were there. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. You asked me a question last night. Why you? And I answered it halfway. But you deserve more than half-truths. I'm not sure I do, she murmured. You do, he said, even if neither of us knows what to do with the answer. Naomi sat back, her expression unreadable. Then say it. Ethan inhaled sharply, like bracing against something sharp. Because when I looked at you, I didn't just see someone strong. I saw someone honest. And I realized I haven't been honest with anyone in years, not even myself. That truth, raw and simple, landed with more weight than any confession he could have offered. Naomi set her cup down on the side table. You say that like it should make this easier. It doesn't, he admitted. It just makes pretending harder. The rain tapped harder against the windows. Naomi stared at the drops tracing down the glass, one after another, like slow, silent tears. Ethan. He looked at her, his eyes steady now, still controlled, but with the tremble of something wanting to break free. I need to tell you something, she said. He didn't move, but the air shifted. Naomi drew in a breath. I never told you. I've never been with anyone before. His face went still. I assumed, he said after a pause, that you... No, she interrupted gently. You assumed I'd been through hard things, and I have. But this... Her voice dipped, softer. This is different. Ethan's gaze sharpened, but he didn't interrupt. I didn't plan to tell you. I thought it didn't matter, that this was a business arrangement and nothing else. She paused. But now I think it does matter, because you touch things without meaning to, and they don't go back the same. A long silence followed. Then Ethan rose slowly from his chair. He didn't walk toward her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough for his presence to reach her skin like heat. Why would you offer something so precious to someone like me? He asked, voice hoarse. Naomi lifted her chin. Because I need to save someone I love, and I don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect. His jaw clenched. And you think I deserve that sacrifice? No, she said quietly. But I think you might understand it. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the storm. The steady hum of it filled the spaces between their words. Then Ethan exhaled, slowly, deeply, as if her words had cracked something in his chest. You shouldn't have to give anything that sacred in exchange for survival, he said. Her voice broke, almost a whisper. You offered me a way out. That's more than anyone else ever has. Ethan looked at her. Looked, and something inside him twisted. Not lust. Not an obligation. Responsibility. Not to the contract, but to her. He stepped closer, and though his hands didn't reach for her, his voice did. We'll find another way. Naomi's brow furrowed. What? You won't have to give yourself to me like that. Not unless it's your choice. Not because of a deal on paper. Not because of money, or desperation, or guilt. Her voice cracked. And if I say I've already made peace with it? He shook his head. Then I'll tear that piece apart and build you something better. Naomi's breath trembled. And Ethan, this man who had once spoken only in terms and clauses and clean-cut lines, was standing before her now, ready to rewrite everything. Not for legacy, not for an heir, but for her. That was the night Naomi realized. Ethan wasn't just offering protection. He was providing redemption for both of them. And the question lingering between them wasn't when they'd fall. It was whether either of them could survive it when they did. The days after their conversation in the library shifted something unspoken between them, not with fanfare or confessions, but in the way silence started to feel like a shared space instead of a barrier. Naomi noticed it in the small things. How Ethan paused now before entering a room, how his gaze lingered just a beat longer when she passed him in the hallway, how his voice softened by fractions when he spoke her name. Still, the lines between them held. Fragile, tense, but intact. Until the evening, they had dinner alone. It wasn't planned. Elise had left earlier with a discreet nod, and the staff had melted away, as if orchestrated by invisible strings. Naomi stood near the marble-topped dining table in a simple, sleeveless dress, a pale champagne hue that shimmered faintly under the low lights. She hadn't chosen it to impress. She'd hesitated to wear it at all. But something in her wanted to feel present, seen. Ethan entered the room as she adjusted the strap on her shoulder. His steps faltered. Naomi didn't look up immediately, but she felt the change in the air. When she finally lifted her gaze, his eyes met hers, and the room stood still momentarily. "You look—" He stopped. His throat worked once before continuing. "Beautiful." She gave him a small, restrained smile. "Thank you." They sat across from each other, the table long, but the space between them somehow too small. The chef had left a simple meal: grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of uncorked wine. They ate in quiet rhythm, clinking cutlery and glasses the only soundtrack. Ethan spoke first. "I never liked dinners at home," he said. "Always felt like I was playing host to ghosts." Naomi looked at him. "Your father?" He nodded. "Every meal was a meeting. Every conversation is a strategy. He once told me love was just a convenient distraction dressed up in poetry." Her brows lifted. "Sounds romantic." "Sounds lonely," he corrected. Naomi studied him. "Do you believe him?" "I used to," Ethan said. Then he looked at her, voice low. "Until recently." She set her fork down, the gesture quiet but deliberate. "Careful, Ethan. That sounded dangerously close to feeling something." He gave a dry smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's the problem. With you, everything's been dangerous since day one." Naomi's pulse shifted. The wine in her glass shimmered in her hand, untouched. "You confuse me," he said, leaning forward slightly. "This whole arrangement was designed to avoid complications. But you don't fit inside the boundaries I built." She tilted her head. "What do I do instead?" "You blur them." A beat passed. Naomi didn't smile this time. She didn't speak either. But her eyes searched his face, soft and unflinching. Ethan stood then, slowly, deliberately, and walked around the table. He didn't ask, didn't explain, just stopped when he reached her chair. Naomi looked up at him, her expression unreadable, her heart not so much. "I shouldn't touch you," he said quietly. "Then don't," she whispered. But her voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. His hand lifted, slow, almost reverent. Fingers brushing along her jaw, then threading lightly into her curls. His thumb traced the corner of her mouth. Naomi's breath hitched. "This isn't about the contract," she said. "No," he agreed. "It never was." He leaned down, but didn't kiss her. Not yet. Just hovered, close enough for her breath to mix with his. The electricity between them surged without release. "Say stop," he murmured. She didn't. Instead, her hand lifted, resting lightly against his chest, right over his heart. "Do you want me to?" she asked. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying something unruly inside him. "I want you," he said. She didn't move, but her lips parted, just enough to breathe his name like a promise, and that was all it took. His mouth found hers, slow at first, like a question, then deeper, with an urgency that left no doubt. His hands slid to her waist, drawing her up to him, and she followed without resistance. Naomi melted into the heat of his shirt under her palms, the taste of wine on his lips, the sound of his breath threading into hers. The kiss wasn't polished. It was raw, desperate in its restraint, tender in its hesitation. He kissed her like she was something precious, something that could break if he wasn't careful. And maybe she was. Her fingers clutched the collar of his shirt. He cupped the back of her neck, deepening the kiss, then slowed, pulling back with his forehead resting against hers. They stood there for a long moment, still wrapped in each other's shadows, hearts pounding in quiet sync. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. Naomi's eyes met his. "Then don't." And something in his face softened, something ancient and bruised, suddenly laid bare. Because for all his money, control, and brilliance, Ethan Whitmore had no armor for kindness, no defense against a woman who asked for nothing but honesty. He let out a breath, stepped back, and said nothing more. But that night, as Naomi lay awake in her room, she could still feel the echo of his mouth on hers. Not possessive, not transactional, real. And that kind of truth was the most dangerous thing in a home built on contracts. Naomi didn't see Ethan the entire next day. The penthouse, typically so still, had become too quiet. It was as if something had been suspended in midair, too fragile to move, too powerful to ignore. She stayed in her room most of the afternoon, curled in the armchair by the window, wrapped in a soft throw blanket. Her book lay untouched in her lap. Her thoughts, however, were anything but still. Last night's kiss wasn't just a mistake. It was a turning point. She'd felt it in his hands, how he held her like he didn't know whether to let go or fall, and in her chest, where panic had wrestled with something dangerously close to longing. This wasn't part of the plan. She hadn't meant to be wanted, and certainly not like that. She could have pretended it didn't matter. She could have reminded herself that love wasn't the currency of this contract. But the truth had already seeped into her skin. He had kissed her like she was real, like she was more than the sum of their agreement. And worst of all, he hadn't asked for more. That restraint was the thing that undid her. Restraint didn't come from desire. It came from care. The lights were dimmed when Naomi finally ventured into the kitchen just before sunset. A folded piece of stationery lay on the island, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Naomi, I've been called into an emergency meeting downtown. I'll be back late. There's dinner waiting in the oven. You don't owe me anything. Not for last night. Not ever. E." She stared at the note for a long time, fingertips grazing the edge of the paper, something heavy pressed against her chest. Not regret, not quite hope, something in between. She didn't eat dinner. Instead, she wandered into the conservatory. She had discovered it only days after moving in. A glass room on the far end of the penthouse filled with tall fiddle-leaf figs, white orchids, and a single bench facing west. A secret corner of peace, alive in a house full of restraint. Naomi sat there, watching the city turn gold and then indigo. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed. That's where Ethan found her hours later. It was past 10 p.m. The storm had cleared, and the glass walls shimmered with skyline reflections. He paused at the threshold, his suit jacket folded over one arm, shirt sleeves rolled up, collar unbuttoned. He looked exhausted. rumpled in a way that made him seem more human. She turned toward him slightly, but didn't speak. He walked in slowly and sat on the other end of the bench, not touching and not pressing. "I didn't expect you to be here," he said quietly. "Neither did I." A beat. "The meeting?" she asked. "Unnecessary," he said with a sigh. "Board politics, smoke and mirrors. Sounds fun. I'd rather be here." Naomi looked down at her lap. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I keep thinking about last night. I know. I'm not asking for more. I know that too. But I wanted to." She looked at him. He met her eyes. "I still do." The words didn't frighten her. Not because she was ready, but because he wasn't demanding them of her. "I'm scared," she said softly, eyes fixed on her hands. "So am I," he admitted. They sat in silence again, the city pulsing softly around them. Then Ethan said, "There's a version of me that knows how to control everything. I built my empire by anticipating people's needs before they knew them. But you—" He gave a quiet, rueful laugh. "You keep teaching me that real power isn't control, it's restraint." Naomi tilted her head, studying him in the muted glow of the conservatory lights. "You kiss me like I'm glass," she said, "because I don't want to break you. I'm not glass, Ethan. I'm stone that remembers how to shatter." His eyes darkened with something too profound to name. Then, "Let me be gentle." She didn't answer, but the truth lingered in the air between them, delicate and dangerous. Naomi shifted slightly closer, not touching him, not inviting anything more, just existing near him, breathing in the same rhythm, and holding space for the ache between them. "You asked me once why I agreed to this arrangement," she said. "Yes, I told you it was for someone I loved. That's still true." She looked down. "But it was also for me, for the version of me that wanted to believe I could survive something hard and still be whole." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "And are you?" "I don't know yet." He reached over then, slowly, and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since the kiss, and it was more intimate than anything they'd shared. She didn't pull away. She let her fingers rest in his palm, neither moving nor brimming with emotions that didn't have names. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked a little. "I don't know what we're doing, Naomi, but I know I don't want to do it without you." She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was soft and sure. "Then stop treating me like I'm a contract." He turned his head to face her, startled. "I'm a woman," she said, "one with a heart learning how to feel safe again." Ethan's hand tightened around hers, not to possess, but to hold, to protect. "I see you," he said. And in that moment, quiet, unspectacular, entirely real, Naomi believed him, even if just for a breath. Because sometimes, the most radical thing a heart can do isn't fall in love. It's trusting the arms it falls into. The following days unfolded like quiet ripples on the surface of something much more profound. Naomi and Ethan didn't speak about the night in the conservatory again. They didn't revisit the moment his hand held hers, or the words they exchanged like unwrapped confessions. But something had shifted, evident not in what they said, but how they existed around each other. There was a new ease in Ethan's presence. His silences no longer felt like walls. And Naomi, though still guarded, had begun to soften around the edges of her fear. She started joining him for coffee in the mornings. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But the rhythm they found, shared glances, unfinished sentences, subtle gestures, spoke a language that belonged only to them. Still, the clock ticked louder with each passing day. The medical process was nearing. Naomi had begun undergoing preliminary assessments, blood work, hormonal evaluations. A calendar was sketched in sterile pencil across the pages of her schedule. The surrogacy, what had once been a cold agreement, was becoming real, and with it, the threat of losing whatever it was they had begun to build. One afternoon, as sunlight slipped through the high windows and dusted the living room in a lazy gold, Naomi sat across from Dr. Hadley, Ethan's private physician. The woman was polite but clinical. Her words were always wrapped in gentle professionalism, making everything more detached. "We've completed the majority of the tests," she said. "Everything looks promising. If we proceed with the next step, we must determine whether you prefer IVF or natural conception." Naomi flinched slightly at the phrase. Natural. There was nothing natural about this. She glanced at Ethan, who sat with his elbows resting on his knees, eyes unreadable. His jaw was tight, but his posture remained composed. Too composed. "I think we need time," Naomi said quietly. "Doctor." Hadley hesitated, surprised. "Of course. Just let us know when you're ready." The doctor left moments later, leaving behind a silence that buzzed like static. Ethan didn't move. Naomi stood and walked toward the window, her arms folding across her chest as she stared at the city's endless skyline. "I can't decide what's harder," she said. "Letting this happen, or knowing you might walk away once it does." He rose, but didn't approach her. "You think I'd do that?" "I don't know," she answered. "But I know how these things go. People take what they need, then they disappear. I'm not people, Naomi." "No. You're worse," she said, turning to face him. "You're someone who knows exactly how to make me believe. And that scares the hell out of me." He stepped forward, voice low. "Then don't believe the worst of me. I'm trying not to." Ethan studied her for a long moment. His following words came quieter. "You think I haven't thought about what this means? What will it do to you? To us?" She didn't answer. "I don't want a child with someone I don't respect. I don't want this entire chapter to end with you feeling used." "Then don't make promises you can't keep," Naomi whispered. He moved closer, slowly, until the space between them shrank into something too tense to ignore. "I don't make promises," he said. She looked up at him. "Then what are we doing?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because if this is just physical, if you're just holding out until it's convenient, tell me now, and I'll go." "I'm not holding out," he said hoarsely. "Then what?" Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw, his touch feather-light. "I'm holding on," he said, "to something I never thought I'd want." She froze. "Naomi," he whispered, voice fraying at the edges. "I don't want a transactional future. I want you in it. But I'm trying to find a way that doesn't break you." Naomi's eyes burned with something fierce and unshed. Her voice cracked. "You can't protect me from the fallout, Ethan." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can be the one who stays after it." She closed her eyes, chest rising and falling with the weight of everything unspoken. "You think this is love?" she asked. "No," he said, honest and unflinching. "Not yet. But it's something dangerous. Something that could become love if we stop trying to outmaneuver it." Her breath caught. She wanted to laugh, to run, to weep. Instead, she reached for him, not with desperation, but trust. And when her arms wound around his waist and his hands settled gently at her back, it was the first time either of them realized how badly they needed to be held. Not as a transaction, not as a duty, but as two people who were beginning to realize That sometimes the most intimate thing isn't sex. It's staying when it's easier to run. It's offering warmth before the fall, and letting someone carry your name like it matters. Ethan held Naomi tighter. Neither of them said another word. But something shifted in the silence. Not an ending, not quite a beginning, but the moment before it all changes. The morning after, the world looked different. It wasn't because the sky had changed or the city outside their windows had softened, but because Naomi's heart felt lighter. Not light, not careless, but no longer clenched like a fist waiting for impact. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, staring at the steam curling into the air. Ethan wasn't awake yet, and she was grateful. Not because she wanted distance, but because she needed time to process the man she was beginning to see more clearly. He wasn't cold. He was cautious. He wasn't distant. He was afraid. And now that fear was something she understood, because it mirrored her own. They weren't fighting each other anymore. They were fighting everything that had taught them love couldn't be trusted. Her thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps behind her. Ethan, hair tousled, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, barefoot like her, with sleep still in his eyes. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He walked to the counter, picked up a mug, and poured his coffee. Everything about him was understated, but the air between them was full, charged with the awareness of what they hadn't yet named. Naomi turned back toward the window. "Do you ever think about what happens when this ends?" she asked. He took a sip before answering. "It doesn't end." She raised a brow, but didn't look at him. "Even if the contract ends," he continued, "this, what we've shared, doesn't disappear. It becomes part of who we are." She smiled faintly. That's dangerously poetic for a man who once said love was a distraction. He exhaled through his nose, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I've had a lot of distractions lately." They stood there in companionable quiet until Naomi's voice broke the silence again. "Would you have done this if I weren't who I am?" He turned his head. "What do you mean?" "If I weren't black. If I weren't someone from a background so far from yours." Ethan set his mug down. "Naomi," he said slowly, "if you think for even a second that your skin or your story made you less worthy in my eyes, then you don't know me at all. I've been treated like a commodity before," she said, in a voice level. "Admired for my body, desired for my difference, but never really seen for my worth." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "I see you." She held his stare for a moment longer, then turned back toward the window. "Sometimes I worry you only want me because I'm convenient, because I'm already here." "Then leave," he said. Naomi froze. His voice had no sharpness, just honesty. "Leave if you need to know it wasn't convenience that kept me reaching for you." She didn't move, but her heart did. It fluttered between fear and flight, and the terrifying urge to believe him. "Would you come after me?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Naomi looked down into her coffee, her fingers tightening around the ceramic. "I won't run," she said, "but I need you to know, if this becomes something more, I'm not someone who will be satisfied with being hidden." He stepped in closer, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I would never hide you," he said. "Not from the world, not from myself." Their proximity deepened, not physical, but emotional. The kind of closeness that only comes when two people peel away, layer after layer of pretense and fear. Ethan touched her face, the gesture reverent. "I've built walls for years, Naomi. They kept people out, and they kept me safe. But with you, those walls are starting to crack. She leaned into his hand. What happens when they fall? His voice was soft. I'm afraid of who I'll be without them. Naomi looked up. Maybe you'll be someone who feels, someone who chooses love over legacy. He paused, then nodded. Maybe he would. That afternoon, Elise brought news, uninvited, of course. Naomi was in the conservatory, watering the orchids, when the assistant breezed in, tablet in hand, and voice clipped with subtle urgency. Ethan's father is hosting a private gala this weekend, she said. He expects you both to attend. Naomi blinked. Why would I be there? You're carrying the Whitmore legacy, Elise said dryly. Or soon will be. Appearances matter. I didn't agree to being paraded, Naomi replied, standing straighter. Elise shrugged. You're part of the picture now, whether you like it or not. Later, when Naomi told Ethan, he went quiet. You don't have to go, he said. But if I don't, she replied, I'll be the whisper behind your success. The woman no one knows, the secret in the background. I've never seen you as a secret. Then let's stop pretending this arrangement can stay hidden. He hesitated. It won't be easy. I'm not asking for easy, she said. Just for truth. He looked at her, expression unreadable. Then you'll be by my side that night, he said. And with that promise, the walls between them cracked a little more. Not shattered yet, but trembling. Because what stood before them now wasn't just a contract. It was a choice. And it would either become their undoing or the beginning of something neither of them had ever dared to want. Naomi never liked wearing gowns. They felt performative, designed to draw attention, not protect it. Fabric that clung and sparkled said, "Look at me," when all she wanted was to be seen without being dissected. But tonight, the gown wasn't the problem. It was the room. She stood atop the grand marble staircase inside the Whitmore estate, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. He looked like power sculpted in black, a custom tuxedo, satin lapels, cufflinks that whispered old money. The crowd below shimmered with champagne and secrets. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this exposed. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Ethan glanced at her. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "That's easy for you to say," she murmured. "You were born into this world. I was born outside the gate." He stopped her just before they descended. His voice was low, deliberate. "Naomi, there's no version of this night where I let you walk alone." And with that, they walked in together. The gala was exactly as she'd imagined. A sea of polished ambition, toothy smiles, backhanded compliments disguised as charm. People didn't talk. They performed. Every word was a move in a silent war for relevance. Naomi had seen these games before, but tonight, she wasn't an outsider looking in. She was Ethan Whitmore's date, his partner, his future, and the stares she received made it clear the world wasn't ready for that. Some were curious, some were polite, but many were calculating. They looked at her like she was an anomaly, a glitch in Ethan's otherwise pristine legacy. And then came she, Madeleine Whitmore, Ethan's stepmother. She was the kind of woman whose presence arrived 5 seconds before her body. Graceful, glacial, gold-dusted in every corner of her being. "Ethan," she drawled, voice like cooled champagne. "You didn't tell me you were bringing someone so radiant." Her eyes never left Naomi. "This is Naomi Carter," Ethan said, his tone firm but courteous. "She's the woman I've chosen to build my future with." Madeleine's smile didn't falter. but the edges sharpened. "How lovely," she said. "And what does Ms. Carter do when she's not transforming my stepson into a sentimental creature?" Naomi smiled sweetly. "I teach art history. And occasionally, I teach billionaires how to stop confusing control with character." There was a beat of silence. Then a faint, dry laugh from Madeline. "Touché." But her eyes warned, "This is a war you've just entered." The evening blurred into practice pleasantries and glasses that never emptied. Ethan rarely left her side. But when he did, Naomi could feel the shift in the room, the tightening of conversations, the guarded smiles, the coded language cloaked in civility. They didn't know what to do with her. She didn't fit the mold, and that made her dangerous. Later, Ethan found her again on the garden terrace, where the music was softer and the stars less performative. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm calculating," she replied. He tilted his head. Naomi looked out over the garden. "They don't like me. They don't have to." "No," she said. "But you do." "I do," he said without hesitation. She turned to face him. "Then you need to decide if you want a life that impresses them, or a love that transforms you." Ethan didn't respond right away. His eyes were steady, but his throat bobbed once. Tension, emotion, restraint. "I spent my whole life building an image," he said, "and you're the first person ever asked what was underneath it." "Because I'm not here for the empire," she said. "I know. I'm here for the man who kissed me like I wasn't a compromise." Ethan took a step closer, closing the last of the distance. "And I kissed you like a man who never wanted to let go." Naomi searched his face. "Then don't." He reached for her hand, not possessively, but grounding. "I meant what I said that night," he whispered. "This isn't just about a child, or a contract. It's about the woman I see becoming the center of everything." Naomi's voice softened. "That scares me. It terrifies me," he said. But neither of them moved. At that moment, they understood what it meant to choose each other despite the world, despite expectations, legacy, bloodlines, and boardrooms. And just before they returned to the party, Naomi looked at him and asked, "What happens when this isn't enough for them?" Ethan didn't blink. "Then we stop asking for their permission." She smiled, slow and sure. And just like that, the night started as a performance, became a proclamation. Naomi Carter wasn't a shadow anymore. She was a reckoning, a truth Ethan no longer feared. And the room, though gilded and watchful, could no longer define what they would become. Rain had a way of making everything feel more intimate. That evening, the city exhaled in slow, rhythmic drops, soft against the windows of Ethan's penthouse, steady like a heartbeat. Naomi sat curled in the corner of the deep leather sofa, a throw blanket over her legs, one hand absently resting on her lower abdomen. Not because she felt anything there yet, but because she was starting to feel something. Possibility, fear, responsibility, hope. Across the room, Ethan stood near the fireplace, his silhouette backlit by flickering amber. He hadn't said much since the gala. Not out of discomfort, but contemplation. Naomi understood that silence. She lived inside it too. "They'll never fully accept me," she said quietly, breaking the hush between them. Ethan didn't pretend not to know what she meant. He nodded once. "I don't need them to." She looked over, her eyes soft but searching. "But this isn't just about you and me anymore." He met her gaze. "No, it's not." There was something more raw in his voice tonight, like a thread pulled too tightly, fraying. Naomi let the silence return, but this time it wasn't heavy, just thoughtful. She watched as he crossed the room and sat beside her, his hand brushing hers gently before settling between them. "I've spent most of my life proving something to everyone," he said. "To my father, to my board, to people who would never see me as anything but a product of wealth. And now," he looked down, "now I want to prove something to you." She blinked. "Ethan." But he shook his head. Not with grand gestures, not with promises that sound like poetry, just with presence, with staying, with being exactly who you need when things get messy. Naomi's throat tightened, because deep down, that was all she ever wanted. Someone who didn't flinch when things stopped being beautiful. The rain picked up outside a little faster now, and the sky was heavy with unreleased weight. Naomi leaned back, letting her head rest against the cushions. "I've been trying to imagine what it would be like to carry a child that doesn't come from love," she said. "To wake up daily knowing it started with a contract, not a confession." Ethan turned toward her. And I don't think I can." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you think what we have isn't love?" She didn't answer right away. "I think it's becoming love," she finally said, "but it's still wrapped in too many layers of doubt." He nodded slowly. "Then let's unwrap it. One layer at a time." Naomi glanced at him. Her expression caught somewhere between challenge and tenderness. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," he said. "But neither is choosing to carry a child for someone. You made a choice based on trust. I need to make a choice based on something deeper." She tilted her head. "Like what?" "Like the belief that maybe, just maybe, our child should be born from something more honest than obligation." Naomi didn't speak, but her hand moved to rest over his. Neither of them said the words aloud, but they hung in the room, warm and uncertain and alive. Later that night, after dinner, simple takeout boxes they barely touched, they found themselves in the library, seated opposite one another, firelight washing the room in amber gold. Bookshelves lined the walls, framed photos of Ethan's childhood, his mother, his early ventures, and the awards he no longer cared about, stood like ghosts of a life that no longer fit him. "Tell me about her," Naomi said. He looked up. "Your mother?" Ethan's face changed subtly, not darkening, but shifting, as if a long-closed door creaked open at her question. "She died when I was 10, he said. "Softest person I ever knew. She used to read to me in this room, same chair you're in now." Naomi looked down at the fabric and touched it gently. "She hated this world," Ethan continued. "The money, the power games. Said it made people forget how to be kind." Naomi studied his face. "And yet, you stayed in it. For a long time, I thought I could change it from the inside. And now I think, maybe I was just trying to justify not leaving." She leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "And me? What am I to this world you built? You're the reason I finally started questioning it." His words settled between them, not heavy, not light, just true. Naomi stood, walking toward the window. The rain had eased, and the city glimmered through 1,000 wet reflections. She turned to him. "If I carry your child, I want more than financial guarantees. I want to know I won't raise this baby alone while you attend meetings about quarterly reports." Ethan stood slowly. "You won't." "I need to see it," she said, "not hear it." He crossed to her, gently, carefully, not like a man pursuing something, but like a man approaching a sacred truth. "Then stay," he said, "not because of the contract, but because of me, because you believe I can be the kind of man who shows up when it matters." She watched him for a long beat. searching, measuring. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a variable in someone else's plan. She felt like a decision, a center, a gravity he could no longer deny. The storm outside had passed, but inside their quiet shelter, something else was gathering. An emotional tempest made not of fear, but awakening. Naomi exhaled. "Then let's do this," she said. Not as a transaction, not as a compromise, but as two people choosing the unknown, together. And Ethan, for once, didn't overthink it. He reached for her hand and held on. Naomi didn't expect everything to change overnight. She knew love wasn't a magic trick, not a curtain that rose and suddenly revealed a perfect world underneath. Love, if real, came slowly, carried in quiet mornings, tentative glances, and hands reaching across emotional distances. But she also knew something had shifted between them. Ethan, who had once been rigid with routine and control, had started showing up subtly. He brought her jasmine tea when her stomach turned in the mornings. He listened, not just nodded, but heard, when she spoke about art, family, or fears that traced themselves deep into her bones. Some evenings, he would sit beside her on the couch. No words exchanged, only warmth shared in the stillness. And yet, for all the tenderness blooming in the corners of their days, Naomi felt a tension she couldn't name. It began with a phone call. Ethan was in the study, doors closed, voice muffled but sharp. She didn't mean to overhear, didn't want to, but the words slipped under the cracks. "I said delay the announcement. The board doesn't need to know about Naomi yet. No, not until after Q3. Naomi froze in the hallway. A minute later, the door opened, and Ethan emerged, expression unreadable. "Everything all right?" she asked, forcing ease into her voice. He paused, then smiled. "Just work. Nothing important." But she saw it then. That flicker in his eyes. That practiced mask she thought he'd shed. It hurt more than she expected. Later that evening, they sat across from each other at dinner. Candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that felt heavier than they should have. "You said you wouldn't hide me," she said softly. Ethan's fork paused midair. "I'm not hiding you. You told someone on the phone the board doesn't need to know about me yet." His jaw tightened, barely. "It's not about you. It's about timing." Naomi's voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Timing or convenience?" He set his fork down. "You think I'm ashamed of you? I think you're afraid of what they'll think, and I don't blame you for that, but I do blame you for pretending otherwise." Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just about you and me, Naomi. There are investors, stakeholders, people who think with their wallets, not their hearts." "And what about your child?" she asked. "What happens when this baby arrives? Will you delay that announcement too?" His face shifted, something flickering beneath the surface. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or the old instinct to retreat into silence. Naomi stood up slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I left my entire life behind to step into yours, but I won't become someone you're proud of in private and silent about in public." He rose too, instinctively reaching for her hand. "Naomi, I'm trying. I'm not perfect." "I'm not asking for perfect," she said, stepping back. "I'm asking for the truth." The room quieted again. The only sound was the faint clock ticking on the wall, and time, always moving, whether or not you were ready. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in the dim light of the study. He stared at a photo of his father on the wall, stoic, polished, everything Ethan had tried to become, and everything he now feared he still was. He remembered the first time he saw Naomi, not just saw her, but recognized her. A woman who spoke like every word was chosen with care, who challenged his certainty without ever raising her voice, who held both strength and softness in equal measure. And now she was slipping away, not because she wanted to, but because he hadn't built a place sturdy enough to hold her. Meanwhile, Naomi stood on the balcony, a soft breeze catching the silk of her robe. The city pulsed below, a sea of blinking lights and distant horns, but her thoughts were quieter than the night. She had given him so much, her trust, body, and future. And in return, she didn't need perfection or promises carved in marble. She just needed to know she mattered more than optics, more than perception. A child deserves to be born from courage, not caution. When Ethan finally joined her, the air between them was charged with a silence neither dared to touch. He stepped beside her, hands tucked into his pockets. "I told them," he said. Naomi looked up slowly. "Told who?" "The board. This evening. I called after dinner." She said nothing. "They know about you, about the baby." "I didn't dress it up with PR spin. I just told them the truth." She blinked, the tension in her shoulders slowly melting. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're not a secret," he said. "You never were. I just forgot, for a moment, that love isn't something you manage." Naomi turned to face him fully. The wind curled around them like a whisper. "You're scared," she said. "I am." She nodded. "Me too." He looked down, then back up, eyes clear. "But I want this. Not out of duty. Out of choice." And for the first time in days, Naomi reached for him. Not in frustration, not in retreat, but in forgiveness. Because love didn't demand flawlessness. It only asked you to show up, especially when it hurt. That night, beneath the hush of the stars and the rhythm of their breathing, they didn't make declarations. They held each other. And for now, that was enough. It was the smallest room in the penthouse, tucked away past the sunlit gallery and down a hallway people rarely entered. It had once been a home office, where deals were signed and empires steered. But now, it was different. Now, it was painted in soft sage, and sunlight pooled across the hardwood floor like a golden lullaby. A mobile of stars spun lazily in the air on the far wall, catching the breeze from a slightly open window. The scent of fresh wood, fabric, and something sweeter, something unnameable, lingered in the air. Naomi stood in the center of it all. She touched the crib's edge lightly, fingertips tracing the carved detail. She had chosen simple, elegant, no gold or ostentation, just safe, real. Behind her, Ethan leaned quietly against the door frame. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, his shirt still rumpled from a long meeting, and he had excused himself early. To come home, to come here. "She's going to sleep here," Naomi murmured. He walked over slowly, his gaze fixed on her, not just her body, which carried his child with quiet grace, but her presence. The stillness she brought into the room was sacred. "You sound like you've already decided it's a girl," he said, a smile touching his voice. Naomi looked over her shoulder, meeting his eyes. "I haven't, but she feels like a girl." He stepped closer. "And if it's a boy?" She smiled faintly. "Then he'll sleep here too." They stood in silence, watching the room together. "You know," Ethan said softly, "when I was growing up, no one called any space in the house mine. Every room felt like a museum, polished, quiet, off limits." Naomi glanced at him, something tender in her expression. "This won't be that." "No," he said. "It already isn't." He hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Naomi turned toward him as he handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "A list." She unfolded it slowly. Names. Dozens of them. Handwritten. Some crossed out. Some circled. A few with stars beside them. Naomi raised her brows. "You've been brainstorming baby names?" she said, amused. "I've been thinking," he said, "about legacy, about what we leave behind, and what it means to name someone when you don't yet know who they'll be." She ran her eyes down the list. Maeve, Elias, Seraphine, Jonah, Zora, Atlas. "You've got taste," she murmured. "You've got veto power." Naomi folded the paper again, holding it in her palm. "Let's not rush," she said. "Let's meet them first." Ethan nodded, agreed. Her gaze softened. "But for the record, Seraphine is beautiful." He chuckled. "That's the one my mother would have chosen. She used to love French poetry, said it softened the world." They drifted closer, not touching, but not apart either. Naomi spoke slowly, her voice steady. "Do you think we're ready? For the baby? For everything that comes after?" Ethan thought for a moment. "No." Naomi looked up, surprised. "But I don't think readiness comes before the fall," he added. "I think we figure it out because we fall." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I keep thinking of what kind of parent I'll be, whether I'll know how to hold a fever, how to stay calm when they cry, and I don't know why." Ethan's voice was quiet. "You'll know how to love them. That's more than I ever had growing up." Naomi turned to face him fully now. "You had your mother." He nodded. "For a while. And then she was a memory. My father filled the house with ambition and silence. We were never allowed to cry, never allowed to ask for more than what was given." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "We get to rewrite that," she said. He exhaled, long and slow. "I want to." They stood like that, hand in hand, in the quiet of the nursery. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to soften, pink brushing against the horizon like the first whisper of a lullaby. Naomi looked at the rocking chair in the corner. "You'll rock her to sleep?" she asked. He smiled. "Every night, if she lets me." "And read to her?" "I'll recite contracts and board memos until she begs for fairy tales." Naomi laughed, the sound rich and effortless. And for a moment, the weight of everything else, the boardroom politics, the public scrutiny, the expectations neither of them had asked for, fell away. All that remained was this room, this quiet, this promise. A life that would begin not with perfection, but with presence. Not with certainty, but with choice. Naomi rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. He held her close, his hand gently resting on the curve of her belly, where the future stirred quietly beneath his palm. And neither of them spoke. Because sometimes, the most important things are built in silence, like trust, like family, like love, learning to name itself before it has words. It was a Saturday night that felt nothing like the others. The city hummed with distant laughter and late dinners below. But within the penthouse, time slowed to something delicate, like silk slipping through fingers. Naomi stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands absently slicing strawberries into a porcelain bowl. The overhead lights were dimmed, and soft jazz floated from the speakers, coaxing stillness into the air. Ethan watched her from across the island. He hadn't said much in the last half hour, content to take in how she moved. Unhurried, grounded, luminous, in the kind of quiet joy that made a man feel like he could breathe deeply again. Her pregnancy had begun to show. subtly, beautifully. The swell of her belly was a quiet declaration. Life was being made here. Naomi caught him looking. She smiled without turning. "You're thinking too loudly again," he chuckled. "Am I that obvious?" "Always." He stood and joined her on the other side of the island, reaching for a strawberry slice. "I wasn't thinking. I was remembering." She paused. "Remembering what?" "The day you signed the contract. You sat across from me in that gray dress with your chin held so high, like you were walking into war. Not an agreement." Naomi smirked. "It was a kind of war. Just with less blood and more fine print." Ethan leaned against the counter, his voice gentler now. "I didn't know then that you'd change everything." She looked at him, eyes curious. "Everything?" she asked softly. He nodded. "The way I sleep, the way I speak, the way I listen, the way I see the future." Her gaze lingered on him momentarily before she returned to her bowl. "And what do you see now?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He walked around to stand behind her, wrapping his arms slowly around her waist, his hands resting over the swell of their child. "I see mornings," he whispered, "with coffee cups and mismatched socks and tiny footsteps. I see fights over what to name the dog. I see lullabies sung off-key and stories made up on the spot." She leaned into him. "I see a life," he added. Naomi closed her eyes, and in that moment, she believed it too. Later, as they lay on the couch beneath a thin cashmere throw, Ethan read aloud from a children's book they'd picked out during their last visit to the bookstore. His voice, steady and low, wrapped around each word like it mattered, even though their child couldn't hear it. Naomi rested her head on his chest, listening more to his heartbeat than the story. But then, halfway through a sentence, he stopped. She opened her eyes. "What is it?" He was staring straight ahead, his mouth slightly open, as if caught by a thought he hadn't expected. "I just remembered something," he said slowly. She turned toward him. "What?" "The day my mother died. I was hiding under her desk. She didn't know. My father had just yelled at her for donating a painting to a women's shelter. Said it was too valuable to waste on sentiment." Naomi didn't speak. She listened, still. She waited until he left, Ethan continued, then sat down and whispered to no one. "A house isn't worth living in if it has no room for softness." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Naomi reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You remembered that now?" He nodded. "Because this place, you brought the softness back." The air was still, not hollow, not quiet, just full. Of everything they had tried not to say. Of everything they were becoming. That night, Ethan didn't return to his separate bedroom. He stayed with her on the couch, tangled in warmth, silence, and breath. Around 3 a.m., Naomi stirred awake. A dull ache stretched across her lower back. Unfamiliar but not unbearable. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, and walked to the window. The city was asleep, but she wasn't. Something inside her shifted, not physically, but emotionally. As if she knew, without question, that the life they had been preparing for was no longer a distant horizon. It was right here on the edge of now. She touched her belly, felt the gentle stir beneath her skin, and whispered, "It's almost time." Behind her, Ethan stirred. His voice was thick with sleep. "Naomi?" "I'm all right," she said, "just thinking." He rose, joining her by the window. The dim city lights reflected in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled. "That you were right. Love isn't something you manage. He tilted his head. It's something you meet, she added, over and over again, even in your own house, even in silence. Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, and in the stillness of early morning, they stood together, on the cusp of change, not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two souls who had learned, slowly and against all odds, how to choose each other, on purpose. And that made all the difference. It happened just after dawn. The world outside hadn't even begun to stir when Naomi felt the first sharp rhythm of her body demanding attention. At first, it was a whisper, a tight pull in her lower belly. But by the second contraction, the silence of their shared room had cracked open into urgency. Ethan awoke to her standing by the side of the bed, her hand gripping the dresser's edge, knuckles pale. He was up in an instant. "Naomi?" She turned, eyes wide, but steady. "I think it's time." Those 4 words seemed to melt every wall Ethan had ever built. There was no boardroom here, private jet, press embargo, or PR team. Just a man watching the woman he loved begin a journey only she could walk. He would still be there for every step. In the car, Naomi's breaths came measured but heavy. Ethan held her hand, trying to mask the wild rhythm of his own heart. He had faced global mergers, government negotiations, and billion-dollar gambles. But nothing felt as impossible or sacred as this moment. "I'm right here," he whispered, as she closed her eyes between waves of pain. "You're not alone." And she wasn't. Hours blurred together. The hospital room became its universe. White walls, soft beeping monitors, the muted thrum of life changing forever in real time. Naomi's strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, grounded. The kind of strength that came not from muscle, but from meaning. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She breathed. And Ethan never let go of her hand. Then, suddenly, finally, there was a sound that didn't belong to them. A cry, raw, new, demanding to be known. And just like that, the world split open and filled with light. Later, in the quiet recovery room, Ethan sat in the armchair beside Naomi, his daughter swaddled carefully in his arms. She was impossibly small, her skin a shade somewhere between his and Naomi's, her mouth curling like it held secrets she had not yet learned to speak. Naomi was asleep, exhausted, glowing in the way only women who had crossed fire could glow. He watched her for a long time. When she stirred awake, he looked up. "You named her," she whispered, eyes drifting to the birth certificate on the tray table. Ethan nodded slowly. "Only if you agree." Naomi reached for his hand, her voice soft. "Seraphine. You remembered. I never forgot." They didn't need to say more. The name felt like music in the air. Naomi sat upright in bed a few hours later, Seraphine resting against her chest. Ethan stood by the window, staring into a completely different world, though nothing outside had changed. "She smells like clouds," Naomi murmured with a soft smile. Ethan turned, smiling back. "She looks like you." Naomi raised a brow. "She looks like herself." He walked over and kissed the top of their daughter's head, then Naomi's forehead. "You both do," he said. Weeks passed. The penthouse no longer echoed. It breathed. Crib in the corner, lullabies floating from the speaker instead of jazz. Bottles on the counter. A baby blanket was half folded on the armrest. Life in every detail. Ethan had stepped away from his role as CEO, temporarily, officially for paternity leave, but truthfully, because he wanted to witness every yawn, every startled blink, every second of this new beginning. Naomi painted again, just small pieces. Ethan would find soft, abstract, dreamlike works drying near the windows. She said they weren't good. Ethan told her they were better than breathing. They didn't get everything right. Some nights were sleepless, some days frayed at the edges. But when Ethan forgot how to swaddle, Naomi would guide his hands. And when Naomi cried quietly in the bathroom because her body didn't feel like her own anymore, Ethan would sit on the floor with her until the silence softened. They were not perfect. They were real. And in a world where so much was built on image, they had built something true. One evening, months later, Ethan found Naomi asleep on the couch, seraphine curled against her chest. The setting sun painted them both in gold. He stood in the doorway and knew, with more certainty than he had ever known anything in his life, that he had finally arrived. Not at a destination, but at a beginning. A life where love was no longer about contracts or expectations. A life where choice met devotion. Two strangers once bound by a deal had become a family. One day, one mistake, one miracle at a time. He sat beside them, gently stroking Seraphine's tiny fingers, and whispered, "You were worth every risk." And if this story has wrapped itself around your heart, let it stay a while. If you've ever believed that love can grow in unexpected places, if you've ever hoped that tenderness could rewrite the rules, if you've ever dreamed of second chances blooming into first homes, then don't forget to like, comment, and follow this channel. Because somewhere, someone needs to believe in love again. And maybe this story was the beginning of that belief. Thank you for being here.